Hi, this is Jim Peters with Peters Principals. As you know, you never know who you're going to have on Peters Principals, and let me tell you, this was a hard person to get. It's Noelle Creegan, who's running for school committee. She and Tim, why always Blake. I always do that with his last name. Tim Blake are both running for school committee, and I think they look like they have a pretty good chance. So let's talk to Noelle today and find out where she's coming from. Of course, Noelle, the first question I have to ask you is, where do you stand on the high school?
That is the question of the day, isn't it? Every day. Well, thanks for having me, first of all, and I apologize if I played a little hard to get. It wasn't intentional, just working other schedules. But I'm glad I'm here with you today, so thank you.
Well, I appreciate having you.
So I would say I've made a vocal stance on the high school debate as it exists today, and I believe that a new high school at Cawley, at the Cawley location, is the best for our kids, best for our city, especially our future.
Okay, well, as you know, I'm on the other side of the fence.
Mm-hmm.
But that is of probably of little interest at this point. I'm just tired of the debate.
It's ongoing, but I think maybe we can be the example of how you can maybe have a discussion about it and have it not be divisive, and just debate about it. And I was saying last night to somebody, I think it's interesting that we can both sides are really trying to act in the best interest of the kids in the city, but we have just a different perspective on the way to do that. So I hope by the time it's all done and the decision is made, as a city, we can get behind whatever choice is made. And really push it forward to make sure it's a great option.
I think you're absolutely right. I heard with some interest that you heard a possibility of a referendum.
Yeah, that's getting bounced around right now.
Yeah.
And I don't know how realistic it is. I know that Councillor Elliott brought it up a couple weeks ago, and it was voted down. I don't know if it was unanimously, but it was pretty close to that. There was very little support for doing that, and the city councillors felt strongly that they were responsible, capable, and in a good position to make that decision. At that point, they were still waiting on the additional data, the next phase of information to come in, which has now come in, and
that next phase of information has come in.
It came in a couple weeks ago, yeah, and they went through it over the last couple of weeks. They had different community meetings. They had a lot of, a couple of different community meetings, and then there were a couple sessions where the city councilors could ask Skanska and Perkins Eastman, their questions that they had, as well as the other experts who did the geotechnical research, as well as the biohazards and that sort of thing, all the different hazardous materials, not biohazards, hazardous materials, so asbestos and other known hazardous items that are in the current high school.
See, I grew up around asbestos. My father died of mesothelioma.
I'm sorry.
And, well, when I was growing up, he was putting up schools.
Mm-hmm.
He was building schools. And it wasn't outside of the realm of possibility that I would be in a gym watching them asbestos the steam pipes over my head.
Wow.
And I'm not planning on having mesothelioma. And I don't think that's where he got it. I think where he got it was serving in World War II on a gunship, and they used to put asbestos in the gun turret. And so every time they fired the gun, they had asbestos particles
that were coming out.
That was probably a lot more dangerous than anything I ever saw. But I do remember putting asbestos up, and my father thinking that this was a wonderful thing because it cut down on fires.
It was. I mean, it's really, and it's durable and all of those things. The challenge comes when you start breaking it apart.
Right.
So it's not necessarily intact, it's an issue. It's really when you start tearing it apart, or you try and, when it goes into dust, which could happen in that situation where your father was on a gunboat. That would make sense too.
Yeah,
it's hard to know, but the issue is that when you tear it apart, that's when it becomes a real dangerous material.
And he did die from it, so I tend to think it had something to do with the Navy war, the Navy time. But I will be glad when we get past this phase and we get into phase 2.
Planning, right?
Planning, right, and curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm of the opinion that there isn't enough work being done right now on curriculum for, it's the curriculum has to outlast the building.
For sure it does, yeah.
Okay, because I just was reading in a book today called The Lowells of Massachusetts. I was reading in a book about the curriculum at Harvard in 1715, and you would be surprised at how similar it is to the curriculum we're using today.
How so? In what way? That it hasn't changed enough, or that we're revising? Okay.
It hasn't changed that much. Math, sciences, at Harvard at the time, religion, English, foreign languages, just 4 or 5 different things that were very similar to what we have today. So it just kind of baffles me a little bit when people say we don't have that much in common with the old days. We have a lot more in common with the old days than you
Well,
might
I think there's history. There's always that balance, right, of history and knowing what's worked in the past as a foundation, and then being able to understand, okay, how do you augment that based on what the current needs are and what the emerging trends are.
Right.
And I think right now where we're seeing that happen from a curriculum basis is we're making decisions now that are more aligned with this STEM curriculum. So looking at science, technology, engineering, and math, and where I think even in the elementary schools, we've gotten away a little bit from that science curriculum, and now they're trying to reintegrate it, and then so much so that we have a school now within the city that's dedicated entirely to STEM. That's really focused on that to reach that type of learner, to really build those skills and those competencies for a certain group of students, which I think is taking a step in the right direction.
Science is definitely taking a step in the right direction. And the thing that kids seem to know more about than I do anyway is computers.
Sure. Well, they've never known life without it, really,
right.
Jim. When you think about it, it wasn't something they learned. They learned how to use a computer like they learned how to read, probably, and maybe even easier than that and younger than that. That they've been exposed to technology.
Yeah, the STEM technology is. I got to substitute teach in the STEM school, and it's amazing what they do with the kids when they're younger, and they're immersed in it.
So what's the benefit? Did you see, is there a more engaged learner in that environment for those kids? Are they more, do they understand things to a different level because they think about solving a problem a little bit differently versus a traditional school?
They seem to be working on that aspect of the curriculum. It doesn't seem to be in place yet, totally. It's kind of interesting that the academic side of things has not changed that much in the last couple 100 years, but it is interesting that the science side of things has changed quite a bit. But even when you think about the science side of things, you think about Benjamin Franklin being the first person to realize that electricity wasn't static, that it was fluid, and that Benjamin Franklin used to have parties with people and have them come over in their socks so they could exchange static electricity. And
oh man, fun parties, I guess, right?
let's have a little static electricity. Okay, all right, that works for me. Okay, Ben, we thought you were.
How about a glass of wine? I mean, what kind of parties? A shocking party.
Yeah, it was literally. No, one of the problems that I have with the Colley site is the I'm not sure where the girls are going to be playing baseball, for instance.
Oh, softball, you mean?
Softball.
There's a softball field replicated right on site. So the softball field, the new softball field, will be right where the current parking lot is for the Colley Stadium.
Yeah.
That's where the softball field will be.
Okay, because I thought that was going to be a soccer field.
No, the soccer field stays intact where it is.
It does.
Yeah, I have the drawings. I don't want to pull them out right
okay.
now,
No,
but
we don't have to.
yeah, we can. I can show them to you afterwards. So the soccer field, so the current baseball field at the top of the complex, the Martin Field, stays intact. The soccer field that's just adjacent to that also stays intact. Then there's a little, road that cuts through, and then Colley Stadium stays right intact as well. So the current, there's adjacent to the stadium. There's two practice football fields. There's a JV and freshman practice football field.
Right.
And then the softball field, and that's the footprint that the building will be on. So then that softball field moves from where it currently is over to where the parking lot currently is, and it gets bordered with beautiful trees, and you have a nice kind of buffer zone between Douglas Road and also, you know, the rest of the property.
Okay.
And you have the softball field, and then you have the stadium, and then on the building would be there, and then on the other side of the building where there's currently that field up against Clark Road, that field stays.
Yeah.
So the field hockey and lacrosse field, the girls' field hockey and girls' lacrosse field stays there. So you kind of have the property bookended by green with the building on one end, but not right against the street.
And it's going to be AstroTurf.
That was part of the replication plan. I don't know if that will be, if that has gotten approved yet. I know the city was scoping it out that way because you can have, you can use it more,
Right.
which is nice. So you don't have to worry about, if there's a lot of rain, like we had in the beginning of the spring. My mom is very involved in girls lacrosse throughout the state, and she had a really rough spring because of all the rain they had, rescheduling games and doing all that stuff. So you can use those fields more frequently, which is nice.
Okay, another problem I have with it is that the building itself is the smallest building being considered,
Square footage wise?
square footage wise.
Yeah, it's just more efficient use of space. That's really, it's built to suit the size that they need as opposed to working within the footprint of the current building.
Yeah.
That's as it's been explained to me, because certainly that's a concern, right? You're not getting enough space?
That's what I was concerned about, right?
Yeah.
Okay, you're going to run for office, and that always is an interesting thing to do, and I have a lot of experience with it.
Mm-hmm.
What is the role of neighborhood groups in your pattern of running for election?
So as far as I'm campaigning?
Yes.
Okay, so I have to do some more outreach. I've reached out to some of the people at the Centerville neighborhood group, and then the CBA, and then I still have to meet with the CMAA. We've talked about coming in probably later in the summer because I think things slow down a little bit as we get into the summer months with everything, and then Pawtucketville, and then getting out to the Highlands too. So really just going and doing my due diligence, but more importantly, the advice that I've received is to just go out and knock on doors. That's the most effective way of reaching out to people, meeting.
It is, and the one thing that I would warn you not to do is to knock just on the doors of people who voted in the last election, because people have good reason for not voting in an election, and I always thought that, and it usually was borne out by statistics, that doing every house in the city was better. Dropping not going to every house in the city,
Sure.
but dropping literature at every
Yes.
house in the city is extremely important, because it's a good way of letting people know who might not have been home when you went by
Sure.
to knock on the door or whatever, that you were there. So
Well, I think encouraging people to get out and vote, and I think maybe based on what's going on with the high school right now, we may have a higher voter turnout because there's been so much discussion, and maybe some people that maybe haven't voted in previous municipal elections will select to go ahead out and do that.
yeah,
So I think that's.
the last election was just very disappointing numerically.
Was it just under 10,000, right around 10,000?
Yeah, it was like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I was reading, and this was a while ago, so I don't have the numbers probably top of mind, you would know, but I was looking at something that Dick Howe had put out about.
Oh, his book. Yeah.
Well, it wasn't, I don't know if it was the book, maybe it was just one of his blog posts that I read that was talking about voter turnout and how it's changed so significantly, and how, back a couple generations ago, you would have 40, 50 people running for city council.
36 when my brother-in-law ran.
Okay, so significantly more than what we have now and what we've had in the recent past.
Right.
So I don't know that we'll get back to those numbers, but if we can encourage.
My father ran for the school committee and won by 15,000 votes.
Wow, won by 15,000.
He won by 5. He had 15,000 votes.
He had 15. Okay.
He won by 5,000.
Wow.
5,000 people voted for him, and
Well, that will do it, right?
that was very handy. But he won by 5,000 votes, and he won with 15,000 votes, and now we're lucky if we get 3,000 votes. And you know,
Yeah, I mean, it's a couple hundred votes that separate the number one vote getter and the bottom vote getter in the last
Right.
couple of elections.
Right.
So it's a pretty tight race.
it's a very tight way to do it, and I wish we had more people voting than we do. But at some point, I'll tell you the story about how they got Texas into the Union, and it was by one vote. So it's an interesting story. Some neighborhood groups are more active than others. Action in the Acre is very active, I know. Other ones are very active. The ones in Highlands are very active. The ones in Belvedere, I'm not sure about. Are they fairly active?
The Belvedere Neighborhood
Yeah.
Association, I've only gone to a couple of meetings with them, and it just varies on the topic as far as how many people are there. But,
Okay.
you know, I've gone to, they haven't been the regular meetings are not the highest attended, I would say, as opposed to what I've seen at CMAA and the Coalition for a Better Acre and that sort of thing.
So why did you pick the school committee as the place where you wanted to run for?
So I have a background in corporate learning and development, which I think some of the foundational, some of the core elements around learning and development apply around education. Not all the time, but some of them do. Specifically around reaching thresholds and validation, and how you identify learning gaps and how you shore up learning gaps and that sort of thing. And using data to help drive your activity. So really using data as a means to understand and to know what's really going on, as opposed to just think what's going on. And I had a lot of fun with that, and I enjoyed it. And it doesn't always sound real compelling to a lot of people, but it allows you to address needs a little bit more efficiently in some situations. And I know they use a lot of data and information within our school district, so that's an area for me of comfort and a little bit of knowledge and expertise. And I'd like to be able to utilize some of my expertise in that area and see if we can't shift things and have even greater results and better results. I think also with everything that's going on with the high school, that decision, there's very likely going to be systemic impact within our district. And I think that's really critical, that's going to be a really critical part of the success of the district, is a real champion for that change, because it's change with a purpose, and then also really staying on top of making the right steps to make sure that change happens appropriately, with communication, with planning, so that we can really minimize any sort of discomfort, or as much discomfort around those changes as possible. And then I think, if we make some of these changes and efficiencies throughout the district, then we have more resources to make, other changes and make our system work a little bit better.
Okay, I think one of the most important things that's happened in the last couple of years is the appointment of the superintendent.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a strong backer of the superintendent. I think he's done a good job. What do you think of him?
I think this is something we agree on.
Well, we probably agree on quite a bit, actually, when you get right down to it. So.
Which is good. No, I've met with Dr. Kofawi a number of times now. He's been very accessible, and we share a lot of similar points of view. I think he's an outsider to Lowell,
Right.
A newcomer, I should say, maybe not an outsider, but a newcomer to Lowell. I was not born and raised here. I've lived here for a better part of 15 years in different places. So I'm not a born and bred Lowellian, and I think we have a certain kind of sit back and say, wait a minute, these are how some decisions are being made, and maybe not as grounded in the political fabric, to use an analogy that's appropriate to Lowell, but maybe able to look at it a little bit more objectively and say, okay, for example, I know it's been historically, the budget hasn't been a back and forth discussion between the school committee and the city council. which, from my professional experience, it's been more that this gets handed to the school department and that's what you work within, with the exception of a couple things. And that's not typically how I worked on my budgets when I had I only had a department of about 25 people.
Right.
But we were responsible for, up to 3,000 employees at one point, and their learning and development. So, in making those decisions, it was set goals and objectives. What do you want to accomplish? What are the resources you need to accomplish those goals and objectives, right? And they're aligned with what corporately we want to happen. So you look at that same kind of goal setting, and then there's things that you can't take out of the budget. You have to pay salaries, you have to pay your electric bills and your facilities bills, all of that stuff. So what's left, and then you prioritize what you're going to do and how you're going to use the resources. So kind of doing it a little bit different, as opposed to here's your number, and then this is what you have to fit within. It's a little bit more creative, and you might end up at about the same place, but I think what it does is gets people thinking creatively about what they want to accomplish and goals and objectives.
Yeah, well, what I like about Dr. Kafawi is the fact that, this is just like the strangest thing to like about him, but is the fact that he has his PhD in engineering, as opposed to...
It's a very logical man that has a PhD in engineering.
Right. That's what I thought too, and I thought that my father had his PhD in education, and it's a very interesting discussion when I talked to Dr. Kafawi about his background and things like that, and he has a really logical approach to what he does. So
it's a no-nonsense logical approach.
Right. So it's one of the things I like about him.
Me as well.
How is the superintendent done on reaching out to parents and teachers?
I think right now he's working a lot within the school department, and then also with some of the principals. I don't know that he has a lot of outreach to teachers. I know some parents, some schools see a lot of him, and they outreach to him pretty regularly. But I think he thinks his role is really behind the scenes, really advocating for what's happening at a district level. But I've heard mixed things, that maybe he could get out there a little bit more to some of these different schools. It's a big district, so I think that's a tall. But some schools say he's there all the time. So I think it just varies on. But he's one thing, and maybe this relates to it. And I found this in talking with different principals and in talking with him too. He allows his principals autonomy to manage and do and respect their expertise of what they know what their school needs better than anybody else does, and respects that autonomy, and respects their ability to manage that and lead that group of students and staff appropriately. Now, step in when he needs to. So some of that may be, his, bringing him in may be related to the principal and their outreach to him as well. It's really hard. All relationships are two-sided, so it's hard to judge it from one side.
Well, we'll go back in and talk about this more later in the campaign. Unfortunately, it's only a half an hour, and it's already gone by.
Wow.
So I look forward to seeing you again and having you on the show again.
Thank you.
And seeing how things are going with your campaign.
Yeah, I appreciate the support. I
thank
hope
you.
I'm closer to getting your vote.
You're closer to getting my vote. Yes. You're closer.
All right, I'll ask for the vote next time. I felt like it might be premature.
Okay. All right. This has been Jim Peters with Peters Principals, and I've been here with Noelle Creegan. And Noelle, you do have a tie to the high school, though.
I do have a tie to the high school. So my sister-in-law, who passed away in 1990, Colleen Creegan, there's the media studio, so the TV studio and the media center is named after Colleen.
Right.
She was a student at the time. She was 16 when she passed away unexpectedly.
Yes.
And also there's a little park as well outside that's dedicated to her as well,
right,
on the corner of Arcan Drive and Father Morissette Boulevard.
I just wanted to have you mention that because I thought it was kind of important to remember Colleen.
It is.
So thank you very much for being on with us, and we'll see you next time.
Sounds great. Thanks.
Okay, thanks.